Turn now to a CBS News investigation of the National Flood Insurance Program. It was founded 50 years ago and is supposed to help flood victims. We found that is often not the case, including for homeowners in Louisiana, devastated by flooding in 2016. Much of the money that should help people rebuild, we learned, instead goes to the very people fighting against them. Our investigation looks at what many consider a broken system. For the last 2 years, Richard and Linda Brown have been living in a shell of a home. No insulation, drywall, or flooring, all while trying to raise 4 kids.
You can't, as a father, look at your kids and they come home to this and they land on a mattress.
Their house in Louisiana was destroyed by floodwaters in 2016. At the time, they didn't panic because they had flood insurance, a policy worth $168,000. To date, they've received less than half that, around $62,000.
We pay into this premium, and all I want is just to be fair, and we weren't getting fair.
2 years later, you're living in a house that's still down to the studs.
Yeah, and the kids have to live like this. They can't have friends come over. We can't have family come over because we living like this, and it's hard.
The Browns decided to fight the National Flood Insurance Program in court. Run by FEMA, the program is responsible for all flood policies in the United States. Insurance premiums and taxpayer dollars fund the program, about $3 billion a year. But FEMA doesn't administer all the policies. It outsources most to private insurance companies called Write Your Owns, or WYOs. They and all of their agents get paid out of the same pot of money as flood victims. Some years, up to 2/3 of that pot goes to the WYOs and the attorneys they hire to fight flood victims' claims. In effect, by paying their premiums on time every year, homeowners like the Browns help fund the very lawyers fighting them in court.
It's like people make money off disasters. The more they can make, the better.
A 2016 government report found little oversight by FEMA of flood litigation spending, showing how one flood case was estimated to cost $87,000 in legal fees just for trial preparation. That homeowner's policy limit was $25,000. Gerald Nielsen's Louisiana law firm was hired to fight Richard and Linda Brown's claim. For more than 30 years, Nielsen has been the go-to lawyer for insurance companies fighting against flood victims, not without drawing anger from Congress.
He dealt with Sandy victims like they were the perpetrators, enriching himself at their expense.
A New York judge called his misconduct in one Superstorm Sandy case remorseless, saying Nielsen's failure to exercise reasonable diligence harmed flood victims. Court documents show Nielsen's firm demanded depositions to verify receipts that would have cost far more than the bills themselves.
Can you imagine losing everything that you have ever had in your life? And you paid for insurance.
John Hoteling is the Browns' attorney. His law firm also represented victims of Superstorm Sandy in court against Nielsen's firm.
There was no effort to mitigate the cost. In many cases, we were asked to have experts re-inspect for a third time homes that were totally destroyed.
A public information request revealed FEMA paid Nielsen's firm at least $29 million for Sandy cases alone. Nielsen declined our request for an on-camera interview and hadn't acknowledged receiving our questions. So our producer went to his office.
He is here. Mr. Nielsen, we're with CBS News.
We caught up with him in the parking garage to ask about his legal fees.
I've got to go through ethics counsel because some of what you've asked clearly is privileged.
Later, Nielsen wrote CBS a letter saying he was acting at the direction of his clients, and all his bills were reviewed by the clients and FEMA.
We just want to put the house back together, and we still like this right now.
What's your message to the people who could do something about this?
Just think about what we're going through. We're not asking for much. We just want our house back together so we can just be happy again. That's all.
We will have much more of our investigation tomorrow on CBS This Morning.
CBS News investigation reveals that a federal fund intended to protect flood victims often benefits private insurance companies instead. The National Flood Insurance Program, run by FEMA, is $25 billion in debt. In some years, up to 2/3 of the money that's supposed to help flood victims goes to private insurance companies and the attorneys they hire to fight flood claims. CBS Evening News anchor Jeff Glor is here with our CBS News investigation. Jeff, good morning.
Nora, good morning. When record floods hit Louisiana in 2016, 150,000 people had damage to their homes, an estimated $15 billion in damage. 2 years later, many homeowners are still struggling to rebuild and fighting the same companies and lawyers that they fund with their premiums and taxpayer dollars.
You can still see some of the mud.
Ricky Wall and Melissa Miles were trapped in their home for 3 days when flooding hit Louisiana in 2016.
My beautiful home's gone.
It was coming so fast.
Yeah.
It was white capping over the road.
Over the roads.
Covered in sewer water, they thought things couldn't get worse.
It was pretty tough.
Heartbreaking.
Their home was ruined, but they had a flood insurance policy that they were required to buy worth $176,000.
The insurance company was a nightmare.
Nightmare.
It was
Almost as bad as the flood.
I about had a stroke fighting with them people every day.
When insurance didn't pay enough to fix their home, they had to come up with the cash themselves to do it. And so they decided to fight the National Flood Insurance Program for lowballing them. They are still fighting for $40,000.
This is ridiculous that I'm paying for something that I have to fight for.
Run by FEMA, the National Flood Insurance Program is responsible for all flood policies in the U.S. Insurance premiums and taxpayer dollars fund the program, about $3 billion a year. But FEMA doesn't administer all the policies. It outsources to private insurance companies called Write Your Owns, or WYOs. They and all of their agents get paid out of the same pot of money as flood victims. Some years up to 2/3 of that pot goes to WYOs and the attorneys they hire to fight against flood victims.
Come on, buddy.
In effect, by paying their premiums on time every year, homeowners like Ricky and Melissa help fund the very lawyers fighting them in court.
How can they sleep at night doing us what they done?
Wall's insurance company hired the Louisiana law firm of Gerald Nielsen to fight Ricky and Melissa's claim. Nielsen's firm has been fighting flood claims on behalf of insurance companies for over 30 years, not without controversy. After Superstorm Sandy, Congress criticized Nielsen's firm for how it defended WIOs, whose engineers allegedly altered reports to avoid paying claims.
He dealt with Sandy victims like they were the perpetrators, enriching himself at their expense.
A New York judge called Nielsen's misconduct in one Sandy case remorseless for delaying cases at taxpayer expense. To give you an idea of the costs involved here, you could rent this 1965 Bentley Silver Cloud for just under $1,000 for the afternoon. Nielsen's office spent 5 times that to ship documents to this law office from one that is half a mile away. CBS News obtained a budget drafted in 2014 for a Sandy case showing Nielsen's firm estimated that a single case would cost $188,000 taxpayer dollars if it went to trial. The cap on any home flood policy is $250,000.
Mr. Nielsen, we're with CBS News.
Nielsen didn't want to talk to us about his fees and expenses.
But I've got to go through ethics counsel because some of what you've asked clearly is privileged.
A public information request revealed FEMA paid Nielsen's firm at least $29 million for Sandy cases alone.
Things need to change.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to do something about it.
How are you?
Wall hired attorney John Hotaling. Hotaling's firm represents flood victims and fought in court against Nielsen's firm during Sandy.
There was no effort to mitigate the cost. In many cases, we were asked to have experts re-inspect for a 3rd time homes that were totally destroyed.
FEMA says it has no authority to fire lawyers hired by private insurance companies.
They're jacking around policyholders. That's unacceptable, and somebody's got to do something about it, and by God, it's supposed to be FEMA.
Senator John Kennedy has a bill to change that.
Once they get that authority, I will chase them like a hound from hell until I find out that they fix this problem, because I believe there is a problem.
Come on, come on.
Homeowners like Wall wish FEMA had tightened its belt before making him pay out of his own pocket.
That's not fair. And they say it's the American way. That's not fair.
Gerald Nielsen, the lawyer who defends WYO, said in a letter to CBS News he could not talk about his fees and expenses, but that he was acting at the direction of his clients and that all of his firm's bills were reviewed by clients and FEMA. FEMA did respond to our report overnight, saying it will pay every dime policyholders are due, and it's created an oversight team to address billing and other litigation matters.
Jeff, thanks. Of course, the question of what's due is the one at issue. $30 million.
$30 million for one lawyer.
One attorney. Keep in mind, I mean, there's a peace of mind in knowing that you pay your insurance premiums on time, and you think that if something happens, that you're going to be reimbursed and everything will be okay. In many cases, it's not.
That's right. When people talk about draining the swamp in Washington, this is what they're talking about.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. New research.